we want to hear feedback on. It will continue to evolve as it goes through the public process. But wanted to just reiterate some of those points from last month. As we think about, how do we maintain and evolve vibrant downtown that's able to grow alongside our historic core. It's looking for opportunities, and so whether it is to expand housing opportunities downtown, whether it's to increase economic viability downtown, and we're looking for those. Really, I think that's the best word to describe it. And we're really building off of years, if not decades, of investment and policy making here in the community. So we think about the Central Petaluma specific plan, the SMART code, the theater district overlay. These are things that we're building off of as we continue and to have this discussion about the overlay. And so with that, thanks again for your time and your interest, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in person real soon.
All right, great. Well, that was a bit of technology there. So we appreciate that Brian was able to provide those remarks and for us to be able to incorporate them into the presentation this evening. A brief review of the agenda. You've got the detailed agenda with you. But the topics we want to cover this evening are to talk about how we are reviewing the overlay, the proposed overlay, as well as why the overlay is being brought forward for consideration. And then we'll have a brief Q&A, and then we'll go into the details of the overlay itself. So answer the questions about what is it, what does it look like, what will it do, and so forth. And joining me for the responding to a question about how we're going to process the overlay will be Eric Danley. So Eric, if you'd like to come up. Thank you, Andrew, and good. Sorry. Sure. Right after I introduce myself. So good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Danley. I am proud to serve the city of Petaluma as its city attorney, and I'm here representing staff and filling in a little bit for Brian O, our community development director, who, as you saw, is here for the video. And what I'm going to do on this one slide would be great here to help answer questions. As Andrew mentioned, is to contextualize a little bit this rather project-focused and also policy-focused discussion about the overlay in terms of why we're having it and what occasioned it. And we can talk about that more if there are questions. So what has occasioned this discussion is an application received, as Andrew will go into the details, for a 6-story, 93 guest room hotel building, 58 space parking garage, guest amenities, rooftop lounge, event stage, etc., which proposal would exceed the maximum building height requirements and also the floor area ratio requirements that apply with existing land use regulations. So what that means is for that project to receive the entitlements it's seeking and to be able to proceed with development, it needs discretionary approval, in this case, general plan amendment and zoning amendment approval granted by, considered first by the planning commission, and then ultimately need to be granted by the city council, because that's the legislative act. So when our staff, our planning staff, are carrying out the city's legal duty, legal obligation to process development applications that are submitted for consideration by city decision makers, and they receive an application like that, which is what we refer to as non-conforming, meaning it doesn't meet the existing applicable general plan and or zoning requirements, then it's staff's job to consider and provide options to our decision makers, again, in the first instance, the planning commission and ultimately the city council, as to on what basis could they conceivably approve that project, approve the project conditionally, or not approve the project, because when we say discretionary, we really mean discretionary, and also, as many of you know, including because I think I saw virtually all the current council members and some past members, as well as planning commissioners and other members of city bodies. There's the whole environmental review process that's very closely related to the consideration of the entitlements, because before any discretionary entitlements can be granted, the trigger of the California Environmental Quality Act, which is our environmental laws in California, those environmental requirements first have to be satisfied and addressed. So again, it's staff's job to identify what are the potential bases and considerations that the decision makers of the city need to consider in response to an application like that. And really, it's their job and our job as a team, because it's all of us working together. And it's not just planning, it's not just legal, it's also public works, it's also fire safety, police. It's our job to identify options that the decision makers have in those categories I mentioned of what's a sound and lawful basis that are our codes and existing law for approval, fill with conditions, disapproval, etc. So what that means is, given that very significant discretionary authority and responsibility that the city decision makers have, we need to have a public input process. It needs to inform their decision making. It's not just the staff analysis, land use law, city requirements, legal considerations. It's community input. That's a very important factor to inform the council's decision making. And as you have heard, that community input and information process started with respect to this issue on June 13th, when there was a study session before the planning commission, and it's continuing, and this is part of it. So it's my pleasure to be here helping provide that information that staff are glad to be able to provide for the community to participate fully in the process and let their decision makers know what their thoughts are in response to the application. So we're going to be gathering that input. The overlay is a key piece of one of the options to which I referred that staff have identified that is a potential path of the project to approval. I'll tell you that because as I already mentioned, the project as submitted doesn't conform to the existing general plan and zoning requirements. There needs to be some kind of amendment to those. What an overlay does is it's a change. It's a zoning amendment change, but it's one that doesn't affect a single project. It's one that's designed to have neighborhood considerations, so that they're thinking about whether the deviations of the application from our existing requirements are justified or not, is often beneficially had in a context not considering the project in isolation. And I think that's especially true when, as is the case here, part of the parcel for which the development is proposed is within the historic district, and the rest is adjacent to it. And Petalumans rightly are fiercely proud of the wonderful historic stock of buildings and historic development in the city. So that, as you'll hear from Andrea, and I'll be quiet so we can get into the meat of the discussion, that is definitely a consideration that informs staff's offering of this potential overlay option, and that's an evolving option too, as Andrew will explain, as to how the decision makers, one path by which they could respond to this application. So thank you very much. Andrew will take over with the details and also be available if there are questions that are we'll ask. Nice to see everyone. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric. Also, to follow up on his comments, we will just be presenting and talking about the overlay this evening. during July 13th study session, we heard from both review authority members as well as the community that to talk about both projects together, the hotel project and the overlay was confusing. And because they are two big projects. And so we separated them out to focus on the overlay while the hotel project is undergoing design revisions to respond to input that's received at the June 13th meeting. Also note that there will be another study session. There will be a joint planning commission and HCPC study session to be held on July 25th at the council chamber. So with that, I want to move forward quickly so that we can stay on schedule and talk briefly about the context that talk through how the overlay evolved and was developed and some of the inputs into the concept of the overlay. We of course look to the general plan, the current general plan, including its mixed use land use designation, as well as the downtown sub area with identified by the general plan, including the vision that the general plan sets forth and the goals and policies included. And then in the general plan update, this overlay project is in constant contact with the general plan update team. And so we're both being informed by the land use analysis that is being conducted, and we're also providing input on that ongoing analysis. Then next, the central Petaluma specific plan, which actually is located across the street from where the overlay is proposed, with the SMART code, which is the implemented zoning ordinance of the central Petaluma specific plan. And the overlay, though, is aligned with the planning concepts contained in central Petaluma specific plan, as well as the SMART code. And then finally, it acknowledges and respects the historic commercial district that is established downtown, including 3 of the parcels that would be in the proposed overlay that would be within the historic commercial district, depending on what is finally proposed as the overlay boundary. So the study area was initiated. We had to begin someplace looking at and identifying some boundaries. The theater district overlay, which is currently in effect, did so because it included the downtown area as well as reached across the river and over to Lower Street. And that's shown in the dotted red line. And then also the downtown sub area as defined by the general plan. To that, the historic districts were added for consideration, and these were all regulatory documents that would inform development of the overlay. And then the current zoning, and we can see in this image that the current zoning majority of it is used. That's zoning that's identified in purple, as well as some civic facilities zoning, which is identified in light blue. And then, of course, existing conditions analysis. There were several walking tours of the overlay area, collecting imagery, looking at opportunity sites, as well as looking at historic buildings that are desired for preservation. And so these are some images of the downtown existing conditions, both acceptable, but then also some structures that are currently vacant or lots that are vacant as well. So really looking at all it, combining the regulatory context with the built environment and fully understanding what is the nature of what's happening within the area where the overlay is proposed. And so the initial overlay that was brought forward to Planning Commission and HCPC and the community on June 13th is identified here. As you can see, it generally respects the downtown sub-area boundary of the general plan, staying to the west side of Petaluma Boulevard South, and then to the south of Washington Street, and then meandering down along Howard Street and A Street. One deviation was that it was pulled back to the predominantly residential areas located over here at the edge of the downtown sub area. And so we want to answer, after talking through the process of how that overlay boundary was established, generally, from both regulatory perspectives as well as from looking at existing conditions in opportunity sites, we want to think briefly about why do we want to do this. One of the reasons is to support the downtown, to support the businesses that are successful. The overlay would propose to create incentives and opportunities for new housing development, as well as mixed-use development in the downtown area. And to continue to maintain downtown as an exciting place and an inviting place. And then also to support the city. When we have land development, that results in economic development, which generates revenue for the city. It gives the city opportunities to invest in other goals that it might have, whether that be the trestle project or dredging the Petaluma River, and to advance those goals by funding those projects. And then we look to the vision and the goals and policies of the general plan. And those are quite clear with regard to encouraging economic growth, both throughout the city, but in downtown, to supporting housing development within the central city area, to prioritize infill development at higher densities and higher intensity, but then also to preserve the historic character of downtown at the same time enhancing it. And then also to provide public gathering spaces. So as we'll see in the section of the presentation where we talk about the details of the overlay and what it includes, we'll spend some time on community benefits that could be required from development to the overlay area. And so at this point, we want to pause and turn it over to Dave's team. After we consider the how and the why of the overlay, have a brief Q&A, and then we'll come back and we'll delve into the details of what the overlay does.
I'll take this for a moment. The rule is, I've already been over the fourth flight, but I do it a third time. Dan gets a shot at me, so.
Yeah.
We have a rule out there for chat, no before you go. Questions are no more than 35 words and then a question mark. That's just to keep us moving along. There will be an opportunity for the end of the meeting for longer comments, but right now, let's just make sure we have all the necessary information available. We have two mic people, Chris Rebel on this side, Elizabeth Maury on that side. You could raise your hands. We'll get to you as quickly as we can. The limited amount of time we may not get to all of you. We'll try to get to as many as possible.
And unfortunately, that's a little hot. I was promised wireless mics, and I have not found those wireless mics. So we have the one wireless mic that I ran home and got. So it's going to be a little difficult. No, I'll let you handle it.
Oh, do you want to then do the wired mic on that side?
Yes.
Okay.
I hate to do it this way, but it looks like if you're on that side of the room, you stay in your seats. If you're on this side of the room, you can get up and get in line behind Chris. I apologize for that.
So we'll go back and forth, one side to the other. Okay. You want to start first, Chris?
We talked about incentives for housing. Do those incentives include developing low income and affordable housing? And can you explain it? There we go.
Great, thank you for that question. That's a great question. At this point in time, the incentive would consist of what the overlay is proposing, which is increases to the floor to area ratio, increase to lot coverage, and an increase to building height. Financial incentives would be delivered by the state under current programs. There's no programmatic financial incentives proposed as part of the overlay.
Okay, anyone on this side of the room? Very good.
I know you said you're not gonna discuss the health project. But could you just tell us why the historic downtown overlay is being coupled with the hotel proposal? Why are they both going forward at the same time?
So the Ooh, this is nice, Mike. So the hotel project as proposed does not conform with the current zoning standards, development standards for development in the MU2 zoning district. And so the option then is one option is to change the standards. And one of the processes to do that, as Eric had described as well, is to rezone. So to do a general plan amendment and zoning text amendments in order to change those standards. And so the overlay is proposed in conjunction with the hotel, and it would propose to increase building height and increase lot coverage and increase FAR for all development within the overlay area, but the hotel is included in that area.
That doesn't answer the question.
Well, the overlay has to be done first. So they're coming forward at the same time, but the overlay would have to be reviewed first.
Other side of the room.
Clarification. In the first slide, we're referring to the housing and economic opportunity overlay. In the presentation, the term overlay is used in about half a dozen different overlays. Can you confirm that the area that we're discussing tonight is in the area shown on the first slide and no other overlay?
That is an area that the revisions are proposed. Yes.
So tonight's discussion is only about the area shown in blue on slide one.
When we get to the next slides on the second half of the presentation, we'll see that there's 3 areas where there's either vacant parcels or underutilized parcels. And so there would be 3 options for revisions to the overlay. What's shown in the blue outline on the first slide is one of the areas of the revisions.
So when you refer to overlay on slide one, you're not talking about solely the area shown in blue for tonight's discussion.
Well, not necessarily, but it will become clear in the second half of the presentation. Yeah.
On this side, I believe you were the next slide. Okay, there's good for people here. Sure.
Hi, there are a lot of questions. I'm sure you know. I have to try and answer them all, but I want to get to a very fundamental question. Why 6 stories? Why 98 rooms? I would like to start there and explain the purpose and how the overlay is dovetailed into that. We can all understand why 6 stories and why 98 rooms.
So a 6-story, 93-room hotel is what's proposed by the applicant. Presumably, when we receive an application like that for a development project, we assume that that's first of all what the applicant wants to develop, and that's what makes most sense for the development. So we received that hotel project as an application, and we understand why the applicant wants to develop that, but we do also presume again that they're responding to market demand, and that the project, what we call pencils financially at the intensity and degree of development that's proposed. So I think that you asked a question about the hotel and the overlay.
Well, the hotel is driving the overlay, and Laurie, you just expressed the financial incentive of the hotel. And I'd like to know how that dovetails into the financial incentives of the city of Petaluma and our preservation of business in the historic district. And this gentleman's had a question about developing low-income housing. And I'm not sure if we're really getting enough information on our side of the picture of what's driving the project and what's driving the overlay. And what it seems to be at this point, and I have lots of other questions, sequel questions, et cetera, the effect on the river. But
You need to stay with the
okay,
question.
yes,
Thanks.
I will stay with the question.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we need to understand, and can you explain further why we are, how do I say this?
Yeah. So.
What,
please finish.
Yes, can you explain further why we are shepherding in the incentives of this corporation coming to Petaluma Development Corporation to create revenue for itself in a 6-story, 93-room hotel?
haven't heard that.
Please, it's Q&A.
As Eric described earlier in his comments, we are compelled by the regulations of the city to review applications that come before us. The hotel application was made and an application for the overlay for revisions to the general plan and the zoning code standards. So we're reviewing those applications. The overlay has additional benefits because it does create the opportunity for the market to respond with development at a greater density and intensity. So there are benefits to the overlay that would be for a larger area and for other projects, not just the hotel project.
Okay, so.
And if I could add to that a little bit, thanks, Andrew. The real simple answer is, under state law, the city, your local government, the city, has a duty, a legal duty, when we receive development applications from property owners or those who are developing property in conjunction with property owners. We have a legal duty to process that application, to ready it for consideration by the decision makers in that sort of very short description I gave of our process. So it's, the city's not initiating the project, that the property owner is initiating the project, and we have a duty to consider it and provide for the community and the decision makers the range of options that exist in response to that application. So
That's what I understood.
okay.
It's opening the door. And I think.
There'll be opportunities for breakout sessions for more conversations.
Thank you.
I'll have a question on the other side.
Actually, I actually have a 2-part question. The first is, who made the application for an overlay zone? And the second is there not another option for the hotel to go for the height that they want, the 6 stories, without an overlay zone?
The hotel application was made, as well as the overlay application was made by Mike Jolly on behalf of EKN Appellation Group. And so that's who submitted the application. Then the second question, the maximum height allowed in the MU2 zoning district is 45 feet. So a 6-story hotel would not fit within the maximum height of the current development standards.
The question was, could the developer would have to propose something less, would we be here today talking about an overlay? Well, that's part of it.
The other part of the question is, aren't there other options for them to apply for variance or something that would not affect the entire town?
So the variance option is available. There are findings that have to be made in order to approve a variance. Typically, those findings are related to physical conditions that would preclude development within the standards that are identified in the zoning ordinance. And after review, we concluded and advised the applicant that we would not be able to make those findings to recommend approval to a review authority of a variance for building height. Right.
So I understand we have 2 more questions, one over here and one here. So we had a number. You'll get another one.
I don't understand why you keep saying that we have found that they couldn't simply have a variance for that one project. I've looked at a lot of stuff. I've done some research. It seems to me a variance could be allowed that wouldn't then affect our entire historic district. Not that I even want that height anyway, but that's beside the point. Now, besides the height of the hotel, you're threatening the entire historic district as it stands, and a developer has asked for this. My question is, who's going to benefit from this the most? The developer who's going to be also now putting a variance, a height difference on the empty lots that we have here? Why is it that the city decided that a variance can't be granted?
So I'd like to address that.
Questions about variance? Why?
So I'll start that if you have that. And there's no decisions that have been made. As I said, staff are doing their job and identifying, that's not just Andy, it's all of us, and identifying options for the decision makers in the community to consider. So Andrew's absolutely right. Variances are not unlimited. They are, they can be granted under our code, and typically when an applicant can show that there's some unique consideration affecting their property that's preventing them from developing it, that's not common to other properties. And it's designed to avoid undevelopable. So I agree with, there's room for disagreement in it. And as I've mentioned repeatedly, we'll probably mention repeatedly more, neither Andrew nor I are decision makers. I see faces in this room that are decision makers, they're more accountable, but I agree with Andrew in terms of what requirements for variance in our code, and typically that there's not a basis for using a variance in this case. Now I want to add to that though, that and maybe qualify a little bit what Andrew said. An overlay is not the only way, okay? And an overlay, as it should be clear already, it doesn't have to be that size. But when a project is proposed that is non-conforming, and this one is non-conforming with both the general plan land use designation and the applicable zoning requirements, if it's to be approved, and we're not presuming that it is, because as I said, that's discretionary. This is a discretionary project because it's non-conforming. But when that's the case, for it to be able to be approved, if the decision makers so choose, I think it's warranted to exercise their discretion that way, it needs to be made a conforming project. So that means the applicable regulations need to change. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a sound practice for the staff and the decision makers to consider not just the parcel and not just the application, but how it may relate to adjacent parcels and adjacent development in thinking about whether that application warrants a change to our regulation. So there's a lot of considerations that can bear on how those accommodations will be made in our regulations. If they are made, it doesn't have to be an overlay. It could be zoning that affects a parcel or parcels, which is kind of an overlay. So Andrew's going to talk more about what are some of the considerations in our existing planning that suggest that's one appropriate consideration. But anyway, that's what I want to say. I completely agree about the variance conclusion. That's why.
Pat O'Brien, neighbor here. I also own O'Brien Law right now. And I heard in general, it's kind of the same, along the same lines as everybody else is talking about here. It seems like we're using a hammer to deal with really small issue. Yeah, I'm gonna get to it. I've heard a lot of arguments. You're not gonna like mine as much. In any case, and I've heard a lot of generalities about why a variance is my mind. Generalities are great. What are the specific reasons why a variance would not? Is there a staff report that was prepared with regard to why a variance would be appropriate, and instead we're going to reason?
There was no staff report because we're in the public information gathering phase. The staff report just identified the application and some initial considerations, namely the overlay about one path for considering the project. As I mentioned, and we can provide more detailed information after tonight's meeting, but the fundamental prerequisite for qualifying for a variance is parcel specific, unique considerations, limitations on developability of that parcel that are not common to other neighboring parcels. And the reason for that is, well, you know, that's as the city's attorney, that's my position. I maintain it's accurate. And the reason for that is if it weren't so limited, then variances would be a very significant bypass of the legislative decisions that have already been made about what's the appropriate zoning and land use designation for various parts of the city. It's intended to be a very narrow exception, and it very rarely arises. I've been city's attorney for more than 18 years, and I think we've seen maybe one parcel that qualifies in my memory. So it's an unusual. It's unusual. It's meant to be unusual. It's a big exception to an otherwise intentionally thoughtful and structured land use plan in the city.
Thank you. There will be another chance for Q&A after Andrew's next presentation. And then following that, there will be some opportunities to provide longer comments in small groups. So lots of ways to participate tonight.
Great. Thank you for the questions. Well, as I mentioned, on July 25th, the overlay will be coming back for a study session before the Planning Commission and HCPC. And we will have a staff report that will be published as part of that study session. So we'll include responses to these questions in that staff report, as well as FAQs on the project webpage. So going on then to the revisioning process, and this is work that's been done subsequent to the June 13th meeting, based upon community input as well as input from the review authorities. We went back and we looked at the study area, specifically looking at vacant and underutilized parcels, as well as parking areas, both public parking and then other parking areas. And as you can see here, the different the colors are color coded. Underutilized is in a sort of orange color. Vacant parcels are in a darker reddish color. And then our public parking is in that should be in more of an aqua color, with other parking in the darker green. So looking at the overlay area a bit differently, within consideration of comments that were provided in the study session, as well as public comments that were submitted prior to it. It's still to look at it within the context of, but more specifically of the historic districts. So how could the overlay be revised in order to remove the historic districts from the overlay to further preserve and protect those historic districts? And so the revisioning process identified through all of the input and consideration of vacant and underutilized parcels, as well as being sensitive to the historic districts, sub areas A, B, and C for consideration. So we can see here sub area A is approximately a 2-block area at the southern edge of downtown. And there are several parcels that are within the historic commercial district of sub area A. When we go over to sub area B, then this is a portion along Western Avenue. Again, one parcel that's identified that's within the historic commercial district. And then finally coming over to sub area C, where none of the parcels that are identified as having potential to be included in the overlay are in the historic district. So this is the revision to the overlay that was presented on June 13th. We anticipate that we would either take forward this map, this proposed revision, but also with feedback and such, one or more of the sub areas could be eliminated from the overlay as it moves forward. And so then the revised overlay options seen here, I believe that the text is smaller, I apologize for that, is left in. But we have identified some city and national landmarks, some local historic landmarks, and showing the proximity of the sub areas to those landmarks. And then also identifying the historic commercial districts, and then the locally designated districts. And down here, the A Street District. This is the National Register Historic Commercial District, and so forth. And so then the overlay really looks at the development standards and analyzes how those development standards that are currently in effect for the mixed use 2 zoning district could be modified. Here we see setbacks that are established for the mixed use 2 zoning district. Front setback is not permitted. And then we have a 4-foot side interior, 10-foot adjacent to a street, side, 5-foot rear, and a 4-foot rear for an accessory dwelling for this residential development. The site coverage has a maximum FAR of 2.5 and 80% coverage of 100% of its for structured parking. And then down here, and this is the key that we talked about earlier, that maximum height limit is 45 feet. And the overlays both the options, the sub area A, B, and C, with the exception of the Keller parking street garage, or the Keller Street parking garage, rather, that's located right here. All of the parcels would be zoned MU2. And so the overlay would apply to those. Now, one question is, well, why the overlay? Why not another option? For instance, just changing the development standards in the mixed use 2 zoning district. If these standards were changed, for instance, if the principal building height was increased to 16 feet in the mixed use 2 zoning district, that would apply throughout the city in any mixed use 2 zoning district. And so to avoid that, recognizing that there are some areas of the city where that building height may not be desired, then the overlay becomes a viable option to restrict those changes to a specific geographic area. And so here then we have the lot coverage comparisons. The MU2 existing has a minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet and that 2.5 FAR with 80% lot coverage. And the overlay proposes to keep the minimum lot size the same, but allow up to a 6.0 FAR and up to 100% lot coverage. And then for setbacks, the MU2, as we described, has existing setbacks for front, side street, and interior side and rear. And the overlay would eliminate those setbacks, but it would establish some minimum setbacks based on building height. And so then it proposes height and setbacks, step-back options, which are related to building height. So currently we have a building height of 45 feet that's permitted by right. Discretion is allowed through the SPART process to be permitted by right, which means that a project could go up to 45 feet. So then the overlay by right would propose an increase to 60 feet with discretion at between 60 and 75 feet. These are areas that feedback is critical on, both in terms of the height that's proposed, but then also the level of discretion that would be required. So for instance, the height permitted by right could remain at 45 feet, with anything over 5 feet requiring discretionary review by review authority. So that's certainly an option. And then this is a drill down on the lot coverage, just to give a bit more of a close-up on those changes between the MU2 existing and then the post overlay. Even though it says by right, again, this is a question that is open for discussion and where options would be developed. So for instance, 100% lot coverage could be subject to discretion as well, and be reviewed through the SPAR process. And then height and step backs, again, doing a bit more of a drill down on it. So the existing 45 feet permitted by right, a proposal to go to 60 feet with a minimum 10-foot step back at the 45-foot for a 4-story height. And then to go up yet another story, another 15 feet with an additional step back. So all of these are data that are included in the proposed development standards, but through the process of the study session on July 25th, as well as additional community input and options made available to the review authorities when the overlay does come forward for formal review at a public hearing. These would be proposed as options for decision makers to review. And so then another, I think, interesting aspect, sometimes you say, well, if you get more building height, what do we get for it? So what's the trade-off? And looking at the community benefits that could be gained from development that could be required. So one is to require public facing ground floor use in mixed use or non-residential building types, along with some transparency standards. So that would help ensure that we're activating the ground floor effectively, that we're also looking towards existing development in the downtown area and responding to that open relationship with it. Also, public benefit, which would improve existing sidewalks, widening them, creating mid-block walkways and such. So enhance the connectivity throughout the downtown area. And then providing a publicly accessible private space that could be in the form of a pocket park or in the form of a rooftop deck that would be publicly available. And another option of expressing or designing to the existing data line. So for instance, we do have the downtown area ground floor building, or the ground floor height ranges from 12 feet to 14 feet. And so designing to that data line and increasing that ground floor height over, say, 10 feet that development might currently desire, but using the benefits of these options to increase it. And then finally, as we see in the last one, to have that minimum ground floor height be 14 feet, which is very generous for development and would be consistent with the 12 to 14 foot ground floor height that we see now. So these benefits then would be applied through the discretionary process, but they would encourage design that's more consistent with the existing built environment in the downtown area. And then as we see here, it would be to be applied then perhaps, because it would be an option for consideration, is let's say that we had 45 feet permitted by right, which is currently the case for the MU2 zoning district. Then if you were to provide, say, 3 of these 5 and respond to 3 of these 5 benefits, and you a development might be able to go up to 60 feet by right. So there's a trade-off there to be gained for the additional height, but at the same time, then the community, the design would benefit, and then in terms of publicly accessible private space, increasing connectivity and such, the community would benefit as well. And then finally, special conditions, looking at a development that's abutting residential use zone or abutting a historic resource, and codifying how to respect that existing development through step backs and through setbacks is another important component of the development standards. And so again, just reflect on how the revisions have been made. The overlay, as it's currently revised, identifies sub areas A, B, and C. These sub areas will be brought forward at the study session on July 25th. There may be a further recommendation with regard to elimination of one or more of the study areas. We're currently reviewing those options. And so I think with that, we began schedule it.
So like, if you're just getting.
Well, I think we're more than 50. I mean, so I believe we're opening it up to Q&A regarding the more detailed components of the overlay.
You want to go first? Okay, who do we have? Okay. Go back here.
And regarding, the downtown example of having the building set up against the sidewalk, which is the model we like downtown a lot. Is there any consideration for how trash pickup happens and all that stuff that takes place in the alleys now? Because it's gonna be out on public streets, as far as I can tell, so I'd like to know more about that. And I'm curious also about this idea we can get public plazas and parks as a result of this kind of consideration. Can you give me an example of when any developer has given up something to do? Thank you.
Who's answering the question?
Trash pickup is definitely something that we do need to drill down on, and I appreciate that bringing that up. With regard to, what developers give up in terms of public parking or public space. A great example, if we look to the Oyster Cove project, and that project is creating a public promenade. It's also would be contributing in terms of park fees to park spaces, to acquisition and maintenance and development of park spaces throughout the city. So all of our developments are required to contribute either through park fees or through a dedication of land to increase publicly accessible space.
My name is Ed Ringline, and one of the things that Kevin Bird addressed is majority of people here, I believe, concerned about the historic aesthetic that Petaluma already has established. Is why not include the requirement of going underground? 6 feet underground maintains a constant temperature, and being able to take that advantage of going underground for parking and utilities and whatever that would be part of the construction that would help with the benefits into the building for energy efficiency, which is a big concern right now for our development of the whole country and for the world.
That's a great idea, and we'll certainly note that and follow up on it.
Okay, we have an opportunity for a question here.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Clark, and it's good to see so many people here. And I've been to quite a few of these meetings, and my question is how much input does public opinion actually go into this? Every time I've come, the hotel has not shrunk. I mean, what about that hotel trying to fit, into 45 feet? Well, it doesn't fit into 45 feet. And it's like trying to put a round peg into a square hole. That's a tiny piece of land. I can't imagine putting a 93-foot hotel there. And why can't the hotel go on to one of the other places? I mean, where 4th and C is bigger, where the Bank of America is. Well, I'm just saying, why can't it either fit into that spot? And if it doesn't fit, why can't it find another piece of land that it would fit on?
Well, that's certainly an option. If the overlay doesn't get approved, then we have to do that. So. there is a lot to absorb. There is a lot to absorb. There's a lot of complications in this. I think you've done a really good job in presenting the information. It's just a matter of absorbing it. You mentioned that sub areas A through C, that one or more of them could be dropped out, I think, of the process. And then there were a number of comments and concerns about a variance. I'm not sure if I understand why a variance can't be approved. It's done, I mean, countless. But if the issue is we can't or don't want to proceed with a variance, then redefine A to include the hotel as parcel B. And you can proceed without having the arbitrary boundary. Having the arbitrary boundary being what's shown as A.
So I mean, this is, you brought this up tonight, right? Just like there were comments about others can make the findings for variance, so why can't planning staff make the findings for variance? That was suggested this evening right now. So we do need to be able to respond to that question, but we also need to do our research in order to respond. So I appreciate the question and take it back, we'll incorporate it and respond to it through our staff report as well as through our presentation. Okay.
Another question from this side? I'd like to have someone who hasn't had an opportunity to ask. Is someone here? There you are. Very good.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. Actually, I have many. Parking has not come up at all. I'd like to ask, you're talking about floor area ratio, lot coverage, height, building height. Why aren't we talking about parking standards? You're talking about community benefit and referring that back to quote staff. We have a staff of 1 as our new planning director who probably doesn't yet know our community. And I'd like to ask that the reference be to our consulting M group rather than staff. And I'd like to ask why the city doesn't start doing that, because that's been requested of the city. And last, I'd like to know, is the developer paying for city staff time tonight?
So with regards to the parking standards, that is something that we are looking at. We just haven't incorporated them yet. Parking is related to the land use, and so we're not changing the land uses. We're only changing the density and intensity of the use potentially. If there's development under an adopted overlay. So we would look at that, but also at the same time, the city is also analyzing parking downtown, and we're being respectful of the ongoing study of parking downtown and alternatives for parking in the downtown area. I'm going to ask Eric to respond to the question about community benefits and referring to a staff of 1 versus a member consulting, because that's in his view. And then the last question was,
Who's paying for staff?
okay. So this is, as we said, this is
July 2013, I was the city's attorney starting in December of 2005 as a partner of the Mars Nautic firm under a contract. And so I was city contract, city attorney, and I was invited to create an in-house legal department, which I did, and became, began as a direct city employee, July 1, 2013, and we now have a legal department consisting of myself, two legal assistants, a legal assistant and two assistant city attorneys. And so all cities of all sizes make extensive use of contractors, and we're no exception. When I started working with the city as a contractor, we had in-house planning staff, and in response to the Great Recession, then City Manager John Brown, and also the fact that the planning department, in-house planning department that became an enterprise not long before, eliminated those positions, some of which were brought back when the M Group contract commenced, by hiring some of those former staff as members of the M Group. So for us, staff is our team, and the executive team, which is really Peggy and myself when it comes to land use regulations and processing of applications, are directly accountable to the council members who you see represented here tonight. And that's our team. So we have business cards that show in the planning department that show the members that are contract staff, and that show, as people have noted, our current in-house planning staff is Brian. So those are our staff, and we don't hide the fact we've had our contract with the M Group, I think, is 14 years. And I've gotten to work with Heather all that time. I've never worked. Before I accepted the in-house position in Petaluma as a partner of the Mars Nave firm, I was simultaneously city attorney for Cloverdale, and before that also for Clear Lake. I had to resign, obviously, my Cloverdale appointment when I accepted the city appointment. I've never worked with a finer planning team than we have, and it is Peggy and I, at least Peggy now, before her, John, who are responsible for the results of that work to the council and through them to you all. And I stand on the record. I'm really proud of our first in the nation new gas station ban. I'm proud of our electrification regulations, et cetera. So that's our structure, and we don't hide it, and it yields the results that you see. And if you have specific questions about those, we'll have to address them. But that's a hybrid approach, and we have lots of to deliver the public services we deliver to a community this size, for the size of our city staff. I assure you, there's a great deal of contract work that is part of that, and that's public too, because our contracts are all public documents. So we're happy to share those in that question. Thanks.
And administer, two questions. Less than half. Question one is, how will those historic structures in the downtown be protected in the context of the overlay? The second question is, I'll preface with a concern, which is that I can see the value of pursuing the concept of an overlay, and I understand now, thanks to this evening, how the current proposal precipitated that. But it appears that we've got the cart dragging the horse. And I would like to know if it would be possible to put a hotel proposal in abeyance so that the overlay can be considered in a more thoughtful and deliberative way, instead of, I think probably many people in the room feel it's being shoved down our throats due to the hotel proposal. So I wonder if there's a way to say, like, stand back for a while and let's give the community time to look at this in a more reasonable fashion while we are in the middle of our general plan process, which is when, frankly, I think it should be considered not as this, special thing. I understand the circumstances, but that's the concern.
That's a really great question. Thank you. The general plan update does not have a moratorium. And so we do continue to receive and process applications that are submitted. In order for us to put a hold on the hotel application, and I'm going to look to Eric for this, for guidance, we would have to have some sort of process to do that. In terms of the rate at which we're reviewing the overlay, we received the application in March. We brought it forward for a study session in June. We're bringing it forward for community input tonight. And we've been receiving comments all along, as well as, and we'll have this study session on July 25th. So we just continue to process like we would any application. We're always available to talk. We're always receiving comments. So it is a very open, very public review process.
I'll just quickly add, when I said we have a legal duty as a city to process development applications, that's really true. And it's actually possible for an applicant to bring a writ in the court, to get an order from the court, to force a local jurisdiction that's refusing to process any application for forward to do that. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer, though, is so we can't just refrain from processing or slow on the application process, and there's some statutory deadlines that get triggered depending on the project, with the Permit Streamlining Act, and their secret timelines. But an equally important consideration, though, countervailing consideration, is when a project like this that's non-conforming with the land use regulations that apply where it's proposed comes forward and seeks to change in those regulations. And one of the reasons why we're having this broader discussion and this overlay discussion is that's a policy change. And it's being occasioned by that development proposal, but there are broader considerations. And I hope it's clear, and I think it will hopefully become clear, that what staff are trying to facilitate for the community and the decision makers is a policy discussion, because it's broader than for just this project. And what's being discussed is, well, if it's broader, how much broader? You know, that goes to the area of control. So it's, I mean, in response to Anne's comment, it's very important, and staff are recognizing and trying to facilitate the importance of considering this from a policy perspective, not a one-off. You know, that's one reason why an overlay is being considered, because as Andrew mentioned, if it were just to change what's permitted in an MU2 zone, we've got those all over the city. That obviously to change those development standards all over the city for this one project in the downtown, that makes no sense. So the need to consider what's proposed here and this proposed departure from the land use regulations that apply in this area now as a policy change is totally and that's a really important part of the consideration. And that's something that the council members and the planning commission are very aware of. And I'm sure they're already having community conversations with residents raising these questions. So yes, super important. And that's very much going to be and ought to be part of the decision going forward.
What about this question about historic preservation?
Thank you. Well, I think the question is protecting and what way? Protecting like from development.
Yeah,
Right.
about the overlay and how it's going to impact our natural and historic district and the physical buildings in it.
So go back. So here we've got the buildings identified as, it's 139. Are buildings that are registered. And then we can also see the historic districts in the historic commercial district is in this boundary here. And then the A Street Historic District is in this red boundary here. So the overlay would not impact the A Street Historic District at all. It would affect this single parcel here in the commercial historic district. It would not, it may back up to buildings in the commercial historic district over here. And then there's parcels here that are within the commercial historic district that it would affect. But those parcels, those one building that exists down here in this area is not a contributor and would need further analysis to determine if it's a historic resource. So a majority of the historic districts are not within the proposed overlay. And so it would not affect buildings that are in the historic districts or that are designated registered on historic registers. Then we go to the example that we used here, using setbacks and step backs from abutting historic resources and the options that we have there to be able to protect existing buildings that are historic resources or that would be identified through survey as being a historic resource. So we do have the existing, we have of course the historic districts. The overlay does propose preservation by pulling back from the historic districts, preservation of the existing buildings, but also the districts themselves, and then has tools such as setbacks and step backs in order to further that protection through the discretionary process.
How are we doing on time? We're pretty late. One more from this side? Okay, very good.
Thank you. My name is Beverly Shore. I'd like to say that I totally concur with and administer. I think this is putting the cart before the horse. My question is a procedural one. I would like to know why N Group accepted this application as it is, knowing full well that it was not in compliance with our general plan, the vision for our city, and our ordinances. Why on earth we should have overlaid, but it should not have to be contingent with this hotel. It should happen before the hotel, and any developer, whoever it is, whether the hotel or anything, would have to comply with our general plan. That's the whole purpose of having that vision for our city. And it should not be people from outside. So my question is a procedural one. Why have we put the cart before the horse? Why are we linking these two projects when we need to have our general plan in place? Otherwise, this project should not have been accepted.
So I'm just going to quickly go back to my earlier answer to say the reason the application was accepted is because we have a legal duty to accept it. And if our planning colleagues did not accept it, they wouldn't be fulfilling their contract responsibilities for the city's due. So that has to be processed, but that doesn't mean this important policy discussion shouldn't occur. And we don't get to choose the sequence. So there's an important distinction between whether the application needs to be processed and whether it needs to be approved. And I think we've emphasized a lot that this is a non-conforming project that is subject to discretionary approval. So it has to be processed, but that doesn't mean it's entitled to approval in its current form. If it is to receive approval in its current form, there will have to be significant policy changes to permit that. And that's ultimately up to the city council, not us, but we have a duty to move that through the process and also a duty and certainly, standing direction from our decision makers to facilitate the most robust public participatory process we can. That's why we're here and why the study sessions, but we don't get to choose what projects come before us. We don't get to choose whether they're processed, but the council does get to choose whether or not they're going to be approved in their current form, because if the council ultimately decides not to exercise its discretion to grant the discretionary regulatory changes that have been requested, then either the project will have to be made to conform or it will be rejected. So that's the process.
Final question, please.
To add in here, I actually came here because I was interested in the policy, discussion. What I find missing from the whole discussion is what are the hope for or potential benefits for the policy change, other than making a lot of money for one hotel. I'm more concerned, I mean, a lot of people are concerned about historic preservation. I'm concerned about keeping the town affordable to everybody that lives here and not making it a upside city where nobody can afford to live. The question is, what are the policy benefits for the, what are the benefits to the city and the goals of the general plan from the proposed policy changes?
There we go. The, development is going to result in short-term and long-term economic activity. So short-term economic activity, there's going to be construction jobs for, 2+ years and so forth. And then as well as purchases of supplies and such. And then long-term economic activity with the employment opportunities if it's a commercial project. And as well as tax revenue that's generated from the increased land value. So there's economic benefits associated with it. There's also related to if it's the hotel in particular, thinking about the economic activity from tourism and how that tourism supports local businesses and increases the attractiveness of Petaluma to visitors. So we have those benefits. If we're looking at housing, we have the benefit of providing housing within the central area of the city in close proximity to jobs, to restaurants and other services, entertainment opportunities. And so we can identify the housing benefits as well in the type of development. Then there's also the opportunity to convert vacant or underutilized properties into properties that are performing, not just from an economic perspective, but also reducing the impact, the negative impacts that they can have upon the community. So those are some of the benefits that would be potentially realized if the overlay was adopted. The overlay could be adopted and there could be no economic development activity or no development activity whatsoever. In which case, then the market would be signaling that even changes to the development standards are not sufficient to incentivize the market. So this is a there's potential benefits that may be realized if land development occurs, but there's no guarantee that land development would happen if the overlay was adopted.
Thank you for your sticking with this. I know this has been a long evening already. It's going to go on for a little while longer. Those of you who didn't get to on questions, I apologize. It's just a lot of folks here. We're going to try something different now. We're going to do conversation breakouts, conversation groups. I forget what the term is. To begin with, there are 12 people in the audience holding yellow pads of paper and blue slips with numbers on it. Could number 1 stand in this corner here? Number 12 stand here. And 2 through 11 stretch their way around the room. One is over there, next to Dan. And then I'd like to introduce Ruth Wire, who will explain how the process works here.
Thanks. So the idea, so I don't want people to get up yet. Hold on, everybody just stay right where you are, except for the facilitators. So the people who have numbers, who are going to be doing groups completely with what Dave said. So breaking into smaller groups so that people have a chance to express what they're thinking and feeling right now is what we're trying to do. And that's not easy to do with a group this size. Okay. And the other thing we want to do is have people break into groups with people that they don't know.
So I'm gonna be counting off numbers and people are gonna go with 1, 2, 3. You're gonna go to the people with the numbers. Hold up your numbers, big number on your pad, so people will know where to go. The other thing I want to say is we really need your cooperation. Because the group sizes are going to be big. So ideally, the group sizes would be small, but we have a lot of people here. So the group sizes are going to be like 10 or 11 people. And the idea is to try to hear from everyone in the group. So we're asking people to not speak for more than 2 minutes, with the goal of everybody getting a chance to at least speak once. And maybe people getting a chance to speak more than once. But one of the rules in the group is nobody speaks a second time, so everybody's had a chance to speak a first time. Okay, so the facilitators are going to keep time. And they're going to ask you to stop. Please cooperate with the time limit, the 2-minute time limit. And facilitators, if you don't think you can keep notes and time at the same time, then ask someone else in the group to keep time. Okay, so yeah, and the goal is for people to be able to say what they are thinking and feeling now after you've heard whatever you've heard this evening. Everybody has things they want to say. I can feel it in the room, and there's a lot more questions than we had time for. So this is a chance for you to say what you're feeling and thinking and order to come out. So I'm gonna count people off now. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You're not going? Okay. Okay. Dennis, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 12 facilitators. So we want to go to the one that you were just designated for. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. People are not following. They're just going wherever they want to go. So, yeah, so you got it. I don't know what you want. So. Yeah, okay. Here. So let's keep going here. So have I given you a number yet? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2. Gentleman in the blue there, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. You didn't hear me say. Okay. So you didn't hear it? Yeah. Okay. So you're 1. You're a 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So 1 would be over in that corner. 3 is over here. Do you have a number yet? 7. Okay. 7 would be probably here. There's 8. 7 is probably over there. So.
So the 12's over here, okay, so let's sit down. So where's three? Here's three. There. Okay. Okay, so join this group. So what number? I'll bring them here. So you've got 30 minutes to do this. Halfway through the time for this.
So there's about 2 minutes left to the 30 minutes, so make sure everyone's had a chance to speak.
Okay. So if you could bring your reviewing to a close. And bring your attention up here to me. If you could bring your discussion to a close and bring your attention up here to me, please. I know you have more to say. So if everyone could, if everyone could bring their attention up here, please. Hello? Hello? Thanks. Sorry, I know it's hard to stop. 30 minutes really isn't enough tonight. But hopefully everyone had a chance to speak at least once and maybe twice in that period, I hope. If the two groups in the back could come forward, if you could just all move up so we're a little bit closer to one another. And so the idea now, what is to, and we're not going to spend a huge amount of time doing this. The people that took notes will take those notepads and we'll have that input in written form. But we wanted to hear from the facilitator in each group, just a very brief, like a 1-minute summary of the themes that circulated in your group. Obviously not everything that people said, but the themes that circulated. And as we go from group to group, if, maybe if people have said stuff already, not necessarily repeating it, but yeah, so group one's here. Does someone want to give a summary here of what happened?
Concerns, there were concerns about the planning department and the end group, and that some members of the group have a hard time trusting them, and that they don't have anything. Another member suggested that the city council represents us and feels like they don't always, that they sometimes take whatever the M group says or planning. They're not taking the general public's info into. And the third thing was that if this overlay is approved, I guess any potential option, that it will increase density, which is kind of the point, which increases cars and traffic. And downtown, especially if it's kind of a mess. Yes, right.
Thank you. Group two.
So we had some of the similar feedback, so I'll try not to repeat that. There was surprise and appreciation of the smaller overlay footprint that was presented tonight, so it seemed less monumental than I had initially. There was a lot of confusion about how the hotel and the overlay came to be spoken of in the same sentence. So, I mean, we understand that it was an option for the hotel, but it's still very confusing why the overlay wasn't spoken about separately. Also concerned about M group and potential conflicts of interest, although those weren't articulated in any particular sense. The the other concern was that while the registered historic, resources in the community are excluded from the revised overlay, there are resources that many in the community would consider historic, but aren't necessarily historic. It would also warrant some consideration for preservation. So that was another concern. And then I think there was a general consensus that the benefits of the overlay need to be more clearly communicated to the community.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Our group was concerned with the view sheds and the corridors and sightlines of the proposed 6-story overlay. Even though there was some changes on the actual amount, there's still a concern that there would be a lot of shading, a lot of wind, a lot of darkness. Sunshine is something that sells related to economic activity. So there was a concern there. They said that there was a disrespect in terms of the human scale, like Healdsburg and Sonoma are tourist oriented, and they don't have the benefits of being on the National Historic Registry, so that we're underselling ourselves as a town if we're not doing things at the human scale, and 6 stories is too much. Without contextual drawings and showing people what 6 stories will actually look like was another concern. How can we have this discussion without that? Digging down is a bad idea for water abatement and earthquakes. And the hotel will create a lot of traffic. Again, 6 stories is way too high. Bad idea for earthquakes and flooding. The overlay needs a lot more analysis by the community. And that we have no design review in Petaluma yet. It's part of our planning commission, and we don't have our objective design standards. And that the housing element has been completed, and housing has not been earmarked for the downtown. So why has this now been marketed as a place for housing? We already have almost 2,000 units that have been designated across the city. That idea that there was 6 stories along Washington Street, putting the stories.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. The groups that went before us, you said many of the same things that we said, and has some other good ideas that I appreciate hearing. And we came to toward the end of our discussion to the idea that democracy is necessary. And that the plan that for the hotel in particular is misplaced and doesn't fit. And that the height and density are inappropriate, not good for this historic district, and will ruin the feel of Petaluma, will ruin the downtown. Another theme was we absolutely need height and density in our downtown if we want to maintain socially and economically viable, and if we want to meet the housing demands that we're required to meet, and I'll editorially and I believe morally required to meet. And we also had the theme that housing is almost completely inappropriate downtown, and also that housing is absolutely essential downtown. And then we got to democracy being messy. Thank you very much. Okay, so that was, is that this group, or is that, there's another group over here?
With similar themes that some were conflicting. One theme that felt as if feelings that this was being pushed on by the city rather than from people in the community. Other themes that they would love to see the city more vibrant. There's a lot of empty spaces, some graffiti underutilized, not so much against change as how it's done. We had some thoughts about Healdsburg's scale and how Healdsburg and Sonoma, which was previously mentioned, has an understanding of scale, how nothing's taller than 3 stories. Thoughts about not wanting the streets to become too dark with large buildings. Some of the more sunlit streets being more vibrant than some of those darker streets. We had another thought about how zone overlay could be initiated in various ways. It just happened to be that this was initiated with another project, but it could have been initiated on its own. Questions about the economic incentives of being able to, or going to 6 stories rather than other stories. Questions of the financial forecasting to see the pluses and minuses of projects like this. Also, thoughts about when gauging the temperature of everyone in downtown, how there are people that are excited about this. There isn't a luxury hotel currently, and it would be appropriate to have one downtown, as well as wanting story poles to understand height, future projects, and get a better gauge of what those higher projects that are.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So our group, various ideas that the process was driven by development and not organically arising from the community, like other groups have also brought up, that that's a problem. That piecemeal zoning, like to break it up, the overlay, do different overlay zones is completely not okay. It's expedient, but it's not taking a comprehensive look at the effect that is going to have on the entire downtown. The overlay consideration needs to be studied by an appointed committee comprised of stakeholders, meaning property owners and business people and community members and housing advocates and all different parts of the community, and really looked at. And the reason, and our group was pretty much in agreement about this, that that we could lose our listing on the National Historic District as a National Historic District, and that this is taking a hard right turn from our stated historic preservation goals and values. And one member of our committee, Crystal, has a master's degree in historic preservation and talked about that, and everybody was really interested to hear that. And we wondered if the M group has a historic preservationist on staff, and if they have reviewed this, and how in-depth was that review? Like, not just I think there was a letter by Diane Painter, but I mean a deep review, not just a one-off letter. The height was a problem, and somebody asked about environmental review. Another person asked, they really said, does community input and public opinion really influence the city council's decision? And we had a council member in our group who said, yes, it definitely does. And we had another group member who said, well, maybe 50-50, not sure about that. So there's a little doubt there. And somebody wanted to know if the fire department had ladders that, that were 60 feet tall, and if they're on this side of town, and what kind of consideration is given there.
Thank you very much. Okay, this group.
Thank you.
So we had a lot of the thoughts that have been echoed already. I'll try to pick ones that aren't repetitive. We actually had a European perspective of modern development occurring alongside historic buildings, that it is both possible and they supported it. And also developers driving policy change isn't new, because they do have an economic incentive to put forth policy changes and amendments, and that often happens. But in this case, it feels like that staff was not objectively reviewing the process, but is actually kind of acting as salesmen for it on the developer's behalf. One of our members saying they seemed almost as employees of the developer. There's also it was brought up the heart of the question, why do we have the zoning we have now? So intimating that our general plan and CPSP were drafted through years of vigorous discussion. Are we confident that this process is sufficient to override what exists already in terms of policy? One of our members has been a Petaluma resident for a long time. Their parents still live here. There is an integrity and an essence of Petaluma that needs to be held on to. In terms of economic benefit, there's an assertion that 6-story zoning will translate to economic benefits, and that needs to be more effectively proven or borne out. During the June 13th Planning Commission meeting, when a representative from Page Consultants, who's working with the developer on the zoning overlay, was asked for an example of a similar overlay that has been made in another city that has been shown to be successful. If you zone it, they will build, we will reap economic benefit, and that consultant could not name one. Concerns were also made about excessive tourism and impacts on local residents when it comes to parking, housing stock, and other unforeseen economic impacts, with the city of Sonoma actually being a reference for a place where locals felt like they were being pushed out and otherwise impacted by excessive tourism.
Thank you very much. This group?
Much to juggle here, sorry. With our group, we have just a whole variety of things that were said. Do we have an underutilized downtown? Will we be making buildings taller or making things better? We encouraging enticing use rather than just making the buildings taller. Fear is that they want to build 6-story housing using every space available within this boundary area. This hotel brings precedent to downtown and what's allowed. Hotel creates parking envy. I love this one. PowerPoint too small to read. Map is also too small to read. I thoroughly agree. Occupancy study might help us understand what has an occupancy study might help us understand what's been done and what's being done. Can supportive docs be made available to the public? How did they define the boundaries of this overlay district? Is this Petaluma? Is this who we really are? Is the planning department doing its due diligence, or are they enabling the developer? Not opposed to the project, opposed to 6 stories.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll just read a smattering of comments. One was, there is the fact that the consultants developing the overlay were hired by the developer rather than hired by the city and paid for by the developer. That fact arouses suspicion. There was a general feeling of cart being put before the horse, a feeling that we are being asked to take it or leave it. The overlay is being developed around the developer's needs primarily, rather than around the needs of the larger community. The developer is pushing the envelope. The question came up, knowing that the existing zoning regulations were what they were, could not the developer have a planning project fit within the existing zoning regulations? Would the project have been financially not viable? The overlay is the process is going. It's too much, too fast. We're not opposed to a change in zoning, but the degree of change from it is just too much, too fast.
Thank you very much.
Similar sentiment, I'll say, I think it's difficult for a lot of people here to understand what's going on. It's so overwhelming. For example, Andrews spoke a lot, and I think a number of people here probably have no idea who you are. And people have no idea what an overlay is and what that means. So it's difficult for people to get up to speed in something like this. There's just so much information and so much technical knowledge demanded. We had comments that the audience was not heard, and I think that was true until this point. I think we're getting some of the audience feedback now. Too much talking up at the front of the room. What are they thinking? The city's acting legally, and they're obliged to do this process. Someone said they were in favor of the original, way back when Ross proposal, the smaller building, no parking. This one is too much. Presentation didn't have total clarity. I think people were just confused with all the stuff and the people who's talking in front of the room and what are those charts, and you can't read the prints. And maybe there's a way that the public could get a printout that we could read at home, or even the slideshow. Hopefully there's a semi-decent video of this we can see at home to study this a little bit better. Historic buildings, there was mention of those, was it 912 official landmark buildings, but what about the rest of the buildings? Are they going to be protected? What's going to be the impact of, say, this hotel on the historic district? Napa, Sonoma, do we want to be like them? Do we not want to be like them? What can we learn from them? Difficult to do public input because it's just too short and too many people. Is the Silk Mill hotel full? Do we really need another hotel? Yes, 5-star hotel would be amazing and draw lots of people. Do we want to become another Healdsburg? Process is rushed and pressured, cramming this through. Do we want economic development like Healdsburg? Maybe, maybe not. Don't turn this into Disneyland. Can we narrow this overlay topic down to the 2 blocks between B, C, and D Street? Why do we have all the other 2 blocks? Or who's even asking for those 2 other blocks of area to be looked at? And please make new construction aesthetically pleasing.
Yes. Thank you very much. So we have, what, 3 groups left? Is there a group back there or no? So we have this group and this group. We just have 2 groups left. Is there any other group that did not report yet? Okay, great. Thank you for everyone doing
Okay, we have much the same, but we have some great additional ideas, but I think in general, there was similar confusion, but I think we completed our discussion by acknowledging that change is going to happen, that we need change, but it does need to be compatible and it needs to be controlled. There was discussion about, the idea of the variance and why is this overlay even needed when there's a general plan update going on, we have existing regulations, and why are we needing to deviate from that? And that this process maybe should follow with the general plans now, since that's ongoing. There was some optimism about the concept of adding housing downtown, but what we were looking for was the group expressed concern that it would be yuppification, not workforce housing. So, if it could provide workforce, that would be beneficial. Again, the change is needed, but 6 stories throughout downtown was maybe too big of a change. It was expressed, we need to see what are the actual benefits, public benefits that will happen. And an economic analysis needs to be conducted for the overlay, not just for the hotel, but certainly for, the infrastructure versus the public benefit. Will this change the character of downtown? And it was also expressed, not opposed to a hotel, but we need one that fits in. And since a local developer wasn't able to build a hotel for so many years, why is this developer coming in with a bigger, fancier hotel? And that led to some skepticism that the economic feasibility of the current proposal that's driving this seemed like it was maybe a little pie in the sky, and there was some skepticism that maybe it was a bait and switch. and that maybe there was another motive driving this, maybe there were other developers lined up, and that maybe there's a lack of transparency. It's also acknowledged that the parking district is inadequate, and that absolutely needs to be addressed as part of any kind of overlay zoning or rezoning, or it should be addressed with the new general plan. That's, you know, we're going to continue with that parking district and not require that. There was acknowledgement and respect for the, you know, the legal opinion. However, it was doubted that a variance is not acceptable. Also questioned whether or not the overlay is needed at all, you know, maybe a variance could happen, or maybe we should stick with the existing regulations. Is this a Trojan horse? You know, is the overlay opening the door for something that we really don't want? Let's see. Okay, that's our report.
Thank you very much. Okay, last group. Hey, everyone. I'll, I know I'm the last one, so I'll try and keep it to the ones that we haven't mentioned. And forgive me if I muddle through these. These are someone else's chicken scratches. I respect the person who made these very much, but they were running in a hurry. Concern with the city blaming the applicant for the overlay. Don't understand why the overlay is required, not but why there is an alternative. Perhaps the overlay should be elsewhere, not the historic district, for example. Question about who decides what is the criteria for what an underutilized property is. The town needs developments, which is not happening. No, a comment about that there's no obligation for a landowner to make use of the overlay. And this one says, thank you.
All right. So I want to say thank you to everyone for, this is not easy to do with a group this size. So thank you everyone for your cooperation to do this. And thank you to the reporters who did an amazing job of reporting and reporting out. Outstanding. I mean, lots of clarity and completeness. So we, you had with the writing on, we want to get them back. So we have the written things, and then recording these papers also, what we said. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to hand this back.
Barry, thank you for the comment that democracy is messy. I think we approved that this evening. It's also slow, but we aren't too bad. It's only 9:16. I think we targeted 8:55. Thank you all for being here. Yes, there is a recording of this evening. Did it work, Dan?
I missed the first 5 minutes or so.
You missed me. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna have you dub it in.
Probably better. Thank you. You let me out and you tell you how to handwrite it. Thank you. No, there will be a lot of conversation going forward. Could be starting this evening. I'm tired. I'm going to walk down to the beers and have a beer. Anybody wants to join me? Let's keep the conversation. I think not people back there are going to join me. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure there's more we can say, but we'll keep moving ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for doing this.
Got it. I'm surely feeling like head save me on the edge.